in the Valley of Mexico, a land of volcanoes, lakes, and endless sky. A wandering people arrived. They called themselves the Mexica, but the world would remember them as the Aztecs. At first, they were nothing. Poor, despised, forced to serve stronger neighbors as mercenaries. But they carried a promise. Their god, Huitzilopochtli, whispered of a destiny. They would find a place where an eagle perched upon a cactus, devouring a serpent. There, they must build their city. And so on the waters of Lake Texcoco, they saw the sign, an eagle, a cactus, a serpent. Here rose Tenochtitlan, a city of stone and water, soon to become the heart of an empire. From the swamps they forged chinampas, floating gardens. From enemies they seized captives, feeding both their gods and their empire. This is the story of a people who rose from nothing to rule with fire and blood. A civilization born of faith, sustained by war, and destroyed by destiny. This is the rise and the fall of the Aztec Empire. They remembered a place called Aztlán, a land of 7 caves, a mythical homeland where their ancestors had once emerged into the world. No one could point to it on a map. It was not a kingdom you could visit, nor a city with stone walls. It lived only in memory, in song, in faith. From this dream, the Mexica, later called the Aztecs, began their wandering. For generations they walked, carrying little but fire, gods, and stories. They were outcasts, begging for shelter, always moving on. Stronger peoples despised them. "You are nothing," they were told. "You are dogs of war, fit only to bleed for others." And so the Mexica became mercenaries, hired swords in the endless struggles of the valley. They fought for whoever would give them food, but they were never respected, never welcomed. Still, they carried a promise. Their god, Huitzilopochtli, had spoken. He was the god of the sun, the god of war, and he had given them a destiny. They would wander until they found the sign, an eagle, perched upon a cactus, devouring a serpent. There, and only there, would they build their home. The journey was long, through deserts that burned the skin, through swamps that swallowed their feet, through mountains where cold winds cut like knives. Children cried of hunger, the old fell by the roadside. At one point, the Mexica were so desperate. They ate snakes, roots, and insects to survive. And yet, they moved forward, not because they had strength, but because they had faith. Every hardship was endured with one thought: the sign awaits. At last, around the year 1325, the Mexica entered the Valley of Mexico. It was a land ringed with volcanoes and mountains. A basin filled with shimmering lakes. Great powers already ruled here. The Tepanecs, the Colhua, the Acolhua. Cities stood on the shores like jewels, cultured, rich, proud. And in the eyes of these lords, the Mexica were nothing. They were mocked, despised, forced to live on the most barren ground. But the prophecy still burned. One morning, as the sun rose over Lake Texcoco, the Mexica saw it. There, on a small swampy island, half hidden by reeds, stood an eagle. The eagle perched upon a cactus, and in its talons, a serpent writhed. The people stopped. They fell to their knees. Tears filled their eyes. This was it. This was the promise. The sign of Huitzilopochtli. On that swampy island they began to build. At first, nothing more than huts of mud and reed. A poor village in the middle of the lake. Other tribes laughed. "How can you survive in mud and water?" they sneered. "How can this place ever be a city?" But the Mexica had no choice. They would make it work. They dug into the lake. They drove wooden stakes deep into the mud. They piled earth between them, creating floating gardens, chinampas, fields of maize and beans, green islands that fed the hungry. Slowly, reed huts became stone houses. Altars rose for the gods. Canals cut through the city, carrying canoes heavy with food and firewood. The lake that had seemed a curse became their shield. The water protected them from enemies, while the chinampas gave them harvest after harvest. From humiliation came survival. From survival came strength, and from strength would come ambition. The city they called Tenochtitlan grew. At first, it was small, just one among many in the valley. But in the hearts of its people, it was different. This was not a city built by chance. It was a city chosen by the gods. Every stone, every canal, every prayer echoed with destiny. The Mexica had found their home. And though they did not yet know it, they had planted a seed that would grow into the mightiest empire of the Americas, from wandering outcasts to chosen people, from despised mercenaries to builders of a city blessed by the sun. The world still mocked them, but the world would soon tremble before them. This was the beginning, the first step on the long road of glory and tragedy. This was the birth of Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan had risen from the swamp, but it was still a small city, hemmed in by enemies, mocked by rivals. The Mexica were strong in spirit, but weak in numbers. If they were to survive, they needed allies. And so, in the 15th century, a bold idea was born: a triple alliance. Tenochtitlan would join with Texcoco, the ancient city of poets and lawgivers, and with Tlacopan, a smaller but proud power. Together, they would challenge the mightiest kingdom in the valley, Azcapotzalco, the Tepanec capital. At first, the world laughed. How could three cities, one of them built in a swamp, stand against the Tepanec Empire? But laughter turned to fear when the alliance struck. Warriors poured across the causeways and canals, eagle and jaguar warriors of the Mexica, scholar generals of Texcoco, and the disciplined ranks of Tlacopan. Together, they broke the Tepanec power. Azcapotzalco fell. The Tepanec lords who had once mocked the Mexica now bowed before them, or lay dead. The valley was transformed. No longer were the Mexica wandering mercenaries. They were now masters of an alliance that controlled tribute, trade, and fear. And yet, the Mexica gained more than just victory. They gained respect. Texcoco provided them with culture, laws, learning, and administration. Tlacopan gave them legitimacy among the old noble houses. But it was Tenochtitlan that provided the fire, the drive, the faith. Year by year, tribute flowed into the city. Maize, beans, chili peppers, bright quetzal feathers, precious jade and obsidian, cacao beans, the very currency of wealth. Every offering fed not only the markets, but also the gods. Because the Mexica believed the sun itself required nourishment, and nourishment meant blood. Thus, the alliance became more than a pact of war. It became a machine, a system where endless campaigns captured prisoners who were marched up the steps of Templo Mayor and offered in sacrifice so the sun would rise again. The world began to fear the Mexica, but they also began to marvel. A city of canals and shining temples was growing in the middle of the lake. Markets bustled with merchants from distant lands. Goldsmiths hammered treasures that glittered like fire. Priests kept the sacred flames burning day and night. The alliance had changed everything. And yet, under its surface, tensions smoldered. Texcoco and Tlacopan were proud. They saw themselves as equals in this pact. But the Mexica hungered for more. For every victory, it was their warriors who took the most captives. For every tribute caravan, it was their priests who demanded the greatest share. Slowly, Tenochtitlan began to dominate the alliance. And with domination came arrogance. The Mexica had risen from outcasts to overlords in less than a century. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. Still, for now, the Triple Alliance stood strong. Together, they ruled the Valley of Mexico. Together, they expanded outward, conquering cities, demanding tribute, and spreading terror. What had begun as a pact for survival had become the foundation of an empire. The Mexica looked upon themselves and saw destiny fulfilled. No longer were they the despised wanderers of Aztlán. They were chosen by the sun, and the world would bow to them or bleed before them. This was the dawn of Aztec power. This was the birth of the sacred alliance. The Aztecs were not just builders of cities, they were warriors. Every stone of Tenochtitlan was laid with the blood of conquest. Every child grew up knowing their purpose: to fight, to serve the sun. From the moment a boy could walk, his life was prepared for war. Wooden swords in the hands of children, mock battles in the courtyards, songs of eagle and jaguar warriors echoing through the night. At the age of 15, he entered the Telposh Kali, the school of the commoner. Here, discipline was brutal. Boys carried firewood on their backs. They rose before dawn to labor in the fields, then marched to train with spears and shields. Their feet were burned with chili peppers if they disobeyed. Weakness was punished. Courage was praised. The sons of nobles trained in the Kalmakak. There they studied astronomy, ritual, and command. They learned the prayers that guided sacrifice, the speeches that bound men to loyalty. A noble was to be both a priest and a warrior. For in Aztec belief, war and faith were one. The highest honor a man could achieve was to capture an enemy alive, not to kill, to capture. For the gods hungered not for the dead slain in battle, but for the living hearts offered at the temple. Thus the battlefield was not merely a struggle of armies, it was a hunt. Warriors rushed into combat with obsidian-edged swords, the Makua Yuitel, seeking not to strike fatal blows, but to disable, to seize, to drag a foe back alive. The more captives a warrior brought, the greater his glory. A boy who captured his first enemy was granted the right to wear the uniform of the eagle or the jaguar. He could dine in the royal palace, sit among nobles, and earn land for his family. Step by step, the hierarchy of warriors climbed higher. 4 captives made a man eligible for promotion. 20 captives made him a hero sung by poets. And those who captured the most were carved into history, remembered as living embodiments of the sun's will. War was constant. Every season campaigns launched, not only to expand territory, but to fuel the sacrifices. Historians call them the Flower Wars. Battles fought not to destroy, but to harvest captives like crops. To outsiders, it was terrifying. Imagine the sound. The booming of drums, the blasts of conch shells, the shrill whistles carved in the shape of screaming skulls. An army advancing across the causeways, painted in brilliant colors, feathered banners snapping in the wind. Jaguar warriors cloaked in spotted pelts. Eagle warriors with headdresses of golden feathers, their faces painted the color of the sky. To the Mexica, this was not cruelty. It was cosmic duty. The sun itself demanded blood. If the sacrifices ceased, the world would end. the stars would fall. Darkness would swallow creation. So, when captives were marched up the great steps of Templo Mayor, the crowd did not mourn. They cheered. They wept with joy. For every heart torn from a chest was not just a death. It was a gift to the gods, a guarantee that dawn would come again. The Aztec warrior lived not for himself, but for the cosmos. He fought not only with obsidian and shield, but with faith. He carried the weight of the universe on his shoulders. And so the culture of the Mexica became inseparable from war. To be a man was to fight. To be noble was to command. To be alive was to serve the sun with blood. It was a society both magnificent and fragile. Magnificent because it forged the most disciplined armies of the Americas. Fragile because it demanded endless sacrifice, endless conquest, endless war. Without war, the system would collapse. Without captives, the sun itself might die. The warrior's path gave the Aztecs their greatest strength, but it also bound them to a destiny from which there was no escape. They had built a machine of faith and war. And soon, that machine would drive them toward glory beyond imagining, and to destruction beyond repair. In the very heart of Tenochtitlan stood a mountain of stone. Templo Mayor, the great temple. Twin stairways climbed its steep sides, one leading to the shrine of Huitzilopochtli, god of war and the sun, the other to Tlaloc, lord of rain and fertility. It was more than a building. It was the center of the universe. Here, the gods touched the earth. Here, the fate of the world was decided, day after day, sacrifice after sacrifice. The temple rose above the city like a beacon. From the marketplaces and canals, one could look up and see its painted walls, its banners of brilliant feathers, its torches burning day and night. The Mexique believed the sun itself watched from above, waiting, hungering, and the hunger of the sun could only be fed by blood. When prisoners were led up the stairway, the entire city gathered. The air filled with the booming of drums. Shelled trumpets screamed like thunder. Incense of copal rose in thick clouds, choking, blinding, but holy. Warriors danced, their faces painted in black and red, their obsidian blades glinting in the firelight. At the top, priests in black robes awaited, their hair clotted with dried blood, their knives sharper than the edge of fear. One by one, captives were stretched across the sacrificial stone. The drumbeat quickened, the knife flashed. A heart, still beating, lifted to the sky. The crowd roared, tears streaming from their eyes, chanting the name of Huitzilopochtli. For the Mexica, this was not horror. This was salvation. The sun would rise tomorrow because these hearts had been given. The rains would fall because the blood had run down the steps. Life continued because death was offered. The temple became the axis of Aztec power. Conquest fueled sacrifice. Sacrifice fueled faith. Faith fueled conquest. It was a cycle that seemed unbreakable. Every great festival demanded more captives. Every coronation of a new ruler, every dedication of a new temple, every victory in war. Each became an ocean of blood flowing down those stone steps. Chroniclers wrote of thousands sacrificed in a single ceremony. The truth may be less, but to the people watching, it was infinity. Foreign merchants who visited the markets marveled at the city's beauty, its canals, its causeways, its gardens. But always their eyes turned upward to the temple. They whispered of the smoke that never ceased, the cries that never ended. They returned home speaking of Tenochtitlan as both a wonder and a terror. For the Mexica, this reputation was power. When rival cities hesitated to send tribute, they thought of the temple steps. When ambassadors debated whether to resist, they remembered the drums and the knives. Religion became politics. Terror became diplomacy. And yet, within this glory was fragility. For the system demanded more, always more. A god who required endless blood could never be satisfied. An empire built on sacrifice required endless war. If the war stopped, if the captives ceased to flow, then the very sun itself was believed to be at risk. The Mexica lived under a sky both glorious and threatening. The same sun that gave them warmth was also their tyrant, demanding lives in exchange for light. And though they ruled through fear, they were themselves bound by fear. Fear of cosmic collapse. The temple of the sun was their strength, but it was also their curse. It was the stone heart of an empire that could never rest, never pause, never cease. For the gods were watching, and the gods demanded blood. After the drums of sacrifice faded, a new ruler stepped forward. His name was Moctezuma, not the famous second Moctezuma whom the Spaniards would later meet, but the first Moctezuma I. He took the throne in the mid-15th century, and under his rule, the Aztec Empire reached a new height of glory. It was the Golden Age. From the swamps of Tenochtitlan, armies marched outward in all directions, east to the Gulf of Mexico, west to the Pacific, north into the highlands, south into the jungles. Wherever they went, cities fell. Tribute flowed. Captives marched. The empire became a web, stretching from coast to coast. Cacao from the tropical lowlands, cotton and fine textiles from the valleys, jade, obsidian, gold and silver from the mountains. Exotic birds, their feathers brighter than jewels. All of it arrived at the great marketplace of Tlatelolco, the twin city beside Tenochtitlan. Here, tens of thousands gathered daily. The air buzzed with bargaining voices, with the clink of cacao beans counted like coins. Merchants displayed goods from across Mesoamerica: salt, honey, tobacco, tools, weapons. Foreign visitors, stunned by the order and scale, compared it to the greatest markets of the Old World. Moctezuma I understood that conquest alone was not enough. He strengthened the legal code, ensuring justice was both feared and respected. Thieves lost their hands, adulterers faced death. Nobles who disgraced their rank were stripped of privileges. Law became iron, but under its weight, society flourished. Education expanded. Every child, noble or common, was taught discipline, work, and the duties of faith. The Calmecac and Telpochcali filled with students who would become priests, officials, or warriors. Knowledge and religion walked hand in hand. And with law and education came art. Poets in Texcoco sang verses of war and love. Painters adorned codices with brilliant images of gods and battles. Stone sculptors carved jaguars, serpents, and eagles in forms so lifelike, they seemed ready to leap from the walls. This was a civilization not only of blood, but of beauty. Not only of war, but of song. Yet beneath the glory, a shadow grew. For every festival of victory demanded sacrifices. For every temple dedication, thousands of captives. The greater the empire became, the more it required. War could never stop, for faith demanded it. The cycle of conquest and sacrifice spun faster, never slowing, always hungry. Moctezuma I, wise though he was, could not escape this trap. He expanded the empire until it touched 2 oceans. But every new province added new enemies. Every new conquest required another to sustain it. The Aztecs grew rich, yet they also grew dependent. Dependent on tribute caravans that stretched across mountains and deserts. Dependent on merchants who risked ambush to bring cacao and jade. Dependent on constant war to provide both wealth and sacrificial victims. And among the conquered peoples, resentment festered. Cities that sent gold and feathers also sent curses. Villages that watched their sons marched off as captives dreamed of revenge. The empire glittered like the sun, but its foundation trembled like thin ice. Still, to the Mexica of Tenochtitlan, this was the age of triumph. Causeways linked their island to the mainland. Aqueducts carried fresh water into the heart of the city. Chinampas spread across the lake, green with maize and flowers. The skyline bristled with temples and palaces, painted in brilliant reds and blues. By night, torches lit the streets. By day, banners snapped in the wind. Foreign envoys entered the city and marveled. Here was a metropolis rivaling anything in Europe. A city of canals, larger than Venice, more ordered than Rome. Here, they said, was the crown of the New World. Moctezuma I had turned the once despised Mexica into emperor. He had woven law, faith, and conquest into a single tapestry, and the tapestry dazzled the eye. But even golden cloth may fray. Even the brightest sun must one day set. The golden age of Moctezuma. I was real, but hidden within it were the seeds of future collapse, dependence on conquest, resentment of subjects, the endless hunger of gods that could never be satisfied. For now, though, the empire blazed, a civilization at its zenith, a people who believed themselves chosen to rule beneath the sun. This was the Aztec dream at its most magnificent. And also, though they could not yet see it, at its most vulnerable. By the mid-15th century, the Aztec world had become a vast web of tribute. Tenochtitlan was no longer just a city. It was the center of an economic machine that stretched across mountains, deserts, and seas. Every month, caravans arrived. Men bent beneath the weight of baskets filled with maize and beans. Cacao beans poured like rivers of currency. Quetzal feathers shimmered in the sunlight, green as emeralds. Jaguar pelts, turquoise mosaics, copper axes, obsidian blades. Tribute flowed in endless streams. The marketplace of Tlatelolco overflowed with wealth. Spanish witnesses, decades later, would marvel at its scale. Tens of thousands gathered daily. Merchants arranged goods in strict order. Food here, precious stones there, weapons in another quarter. Inspectors moved through the crowd, ensuring honesty, punishing cheats. It was commerce elevated to ritual, and at the heart of it, the Mexica grew rich. For the nobility of Tenochtitlan, this wealth meant luxury. Palaces with walls painted in bright colors, gardens filled with flowers that floated on the lake like rainbows, banquets with chocolate drinks, whipped into froth and flavored with chili or honey. Nobles dined on turkey, venison, fish carried from the distant coasts. They wore cloaks of fine cotton, sandals studded with jade, headdresses taller than a man. But for the conquered peoples, tribute meant something else. It meant burden. It meant resentment. Every feather plucked from a Quetzal, every sack of maize carried up the causeways was a reminder of chains unseen. The Aztecs demanded not only goods, but lives. Captives for sacrifice were part of the tribute. A town that failed to provide enough victims could expect the warriors of Tenochtitlan at its gates. Thus, the empire thrived on wealth, but sowed hatred. In the valleys and mountains, whispers spread. The Mexica were cruel. The Mexica were insatiable. The Mexica took everything and gave back only fear. And yet, the system held, because fear worked. When envoys arrived demanding tribute, local rulers hesitated. They remembered the sight of captives dragged up the temple steps. They recalled the rivers of blood that ran down the pyramid stones. Better to send maize than sons. Better to hand over cacao than corpses. Still, cracks formed. Texcoco and Tlacopan, partners in the Triple Alliance, grew restless. They saw Tenochtitlan taking the lion's share. Every victory brought glory to the Mexica. Every caravan enriched their temples first, their nobles most. Resentment grew even within the alliance itself. And beyond, in Tlaxcala and other independent cities, resistance hardened. These were enemies not yet conquered, proud peoples who refused to bow. Year after year, they fought the Aztecs in the Flower Wars, refusing tribute, refusing submission. They bled, but they never bent. And in their hatred, they waited for a chance. In the meantime, Tenochtitlan shone brighter than ever. Causeways stretched across the lake like ribbons of stone. Aqueducts brought fresh water from the hills. The city glittered with temples, palaces, and markets. From afar, it was paradise. From within, it was a furnace that consumed tribute, consumed captives, consumed faith itself. And like all furnaces, it could not stop. It had to burn hotter and brighter and longer until something or someone broke. The empire of tribute was the empire's strength. It filled its granaries, it clothed its nobles, it awed its enemies. But it was also its weakness. Every gift carried resentment. Every feather carried hatred. Every cacao bean carried the seed of rebellion. And when the day of reckoning came, those resentments would ignite like dry grass beneath a spark. The Mexica believed they had built an eternal system. In truth, they had built a powder keg. This was the empire of tribute, magnificent, terrifying, and doomed. When Moctezuma II took the throne in 1502, the Aztec Empire stood at its greatest extent. From coast to coast, tribute flowed. The temples of Tenochtitlan blazed with offerings, the nobles dressed in gold and feathers. And yet, beneath the surface of glory, unease began to stir. Moctezuma II was no ordinary ruler. Tall, austere, deeply religious, he carried himself with an almost divine authority. To his people, he was both king and priest. When he spoke, even nobles lowered their eyes. When he walked, servants laid cloaks before him so his feet would never touch bare ground. The empire looked strong, but Moctezuma sensed something else. He was haunted by signs, bad omens, whispers of catastrophe. Chroniclers later recorded them in detail. A flame in the sky, brighter than the sun. A temple struck by lightning, though the skies were clear. Waters of Lake Texcoco rising and flooding homes. Women crying in the night, wailing, "Oh, my children, we must flee." Strange figures seen in mirrors of obsidian. And above all, the prophecy that one day the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, would return from the east. Moctezuma listened. He prayed. He sacrificed more captives than ever, hoping to appease the gods. But the unease did not fade. It deepened. He withdrew into his palaces, speaking less with his warriors, more with his priests. He fasted. He meditated. His face, once proud, became lined with worry. Meanwhile, resentment simmered across the empire. The tribute system strained under its own weight. Tlaxcala and other unconquered cities fought on, refusing submission. In the south, rebellion flickered. In the east, whispers of strangers spread, men with pale skin and beards, arriving on ships larger than houses. To the Mexica, the east was the direction of Quetzalcoatl, the god who had once departed, promising to return, and the timing was cruel. For in the Aztec calendar, the year of the Spaniards' arrival matched the year foretold for the god's return. Moctezuma was torn. Was this coincidence or fate? He ordered magicians to divine the future. He sent messengers to the coast to learn of these strange men. What they reported only deepened the dread. Thunderous weapons that spat smoke and fire. Animals never seen before, great beasts with hooves and manes, armor that glinted like the sun, impossible to pierce. Moctezuma trembled. Were these invaders mere men? Or gods returned to judge his empire? Within Tenochtitlan, the mood shifted. The festivals continued, the sacrifices increased, but the joy was gone. Priests whispered in the shadows. Warriors looked uneasy. Merchants carried tales of strangers on the coasts. The great city stood at the height of its power. And yet, it felt like a city waiting for something. Something vast. Something terrible. Moctezuma, once the embodiment of confidence, now became the image of doubt. He still ruled with ceremony, still commanded armies, still received tribute. But behind the ceremonies lay fear, a fear that destiny itself was turning against the Aztec Empire. And when destiny turns, no wall, no temple, no army can stand. The stage was set. The omens had been read. The gods were silent. And from across the sea, the storm was coming. In the year 1519, a fleet of strange ships appeared on the eastern coast of Mexico. They were unlike anything the Mexica had ever seen. Wooden towers that moved with the wind, great wings of cloth that filled the sky, and from them descended men who seemed half human, half divine. These were the Spaniards, led by Hernán Cortés. To the coastal peoples, the sight was terrifying. Men with pale faces and heavy beards, weapons of thunder that spat fire and smoke, swords and armor of shining steel, harder than obsidian, and beasts, horses, that the Mexica had never imagined. Creatures that seemed to fuse man and animal into one. Messengers rushed to Tenochtitlan. They brought gifts, reports, and fear. Moctezuma II listened, his face darkened with dread. Could these be gods? Could this be Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, returning as the prophecy had warned? Moctezuma hesitated. He sent envoys to greet Cortés, laden with treasures, gold discs that glittered like the sun, featherwork brighter than jewels, cacao, obsidian, fine cloth. The Spaniards accepted the gifts and hungered for more. Cortés was no god. He was a soldier, cunning and ruthless. He quickly learned of the hatred that the Aztec tribute system inspired. In Tlaxcala, a proud city that had resisted the Mexica for generations, he found eager allies. The Tlaxcalans, weary of Aztec demands for captives and goods, saw in the Spaniards a chance for revenge. And so the alliance was forged. Steel and gunpowder joined with thousands of native warriors. What the Aztecs thought were a few dozen strangers soon became an army. As Cortés marched inland, he moved with both force and diplomacy. Some towns surrendered, eager to escape Aztec tribute. Others fought and were crushed. The Spaniards showed both cruelty and spectacle. Their cannons thundered. Their horses trampled warriors who had never seen such beasts before. Their swords cut through cotton armor as if it were paper. The news reached Moctezuma. His counselors urged him to strike, to march the full Aztec army and crush the strangers before they reached the capital. But Moctezuma hesitated. Fear clouded his judgment. What if they were truly divine? What if killing them brought down the wrath of gods? So instead of war, Moctezuma chose diplomacy. He invited Cortés into the city. He welcomed him as a guest, perhaps even as a god. In November 1519, Cortés and his allies entered Tenochtitlán. Imagine the sight. An army of Spaniards in steel, surrounded by thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors, marching across the causeways into the greatest city of the New World. The markets, the palaces, the canals, all laid open to their astonished eyes. Bernal Diaz, a soldier with Cortés, would later write, "It was like entering a dream. We could scarcely believe such a city existed." Moctezuma met them with ceremony. He bowed, offered gifts, spoke words of welcome, but behind his calm face lay turmoil. Had he invited salvation or destruction? For the people of Tenochtitlan, unease spread. Why had their emperor, so mighty, so feared, treated these strangers with honor? Why were foreigners walking the sacred streets, gazing upon the Templo Mayor, standing in the palace halls? Cortés watched carefully. He admired the beauty of the city, but also studied its weaknesses. The causeways could be cut. The lake could become a trap. He saw not only wonder, but opportunity. And within days, he struck. He seized Moctezuma in his own palace, making the emperor a prisoner in the heart of his empire. The Aztecs gasped in disbelief. Their divine ruler, their voice of the gods, captive in his own city. The world had changed. The Spaniards were not gods. They were men, but men with weapons, allies, and audacity beyond measure. The prophecy of Quetzalcoatl had blinded Moctezuma. His hesitation had opened the gates, and now the eagle of Tenochtitlan stood face to face with the lion of Spain. The clash of worlds had begun. At first, the people of Tenochtitlan endured. Their emperor, Moctezuma, was a prisoner, but the Spaniards held him as a shield. The markets still opened. The temples still smoked with sacrifice. Life continued, though under a shadow. But patience has limits. Rumors spread. The foreigners were no gods. They bled when cut. They hungered for gold, not for faith. They desecrated shrines, mocked the priests, demanded tribute. The final spark came in 1520. During a festival of Huitzilopochtli, the Spaniards feared rebellion. They struck first. In the temple courtyard, they massacred dancers and nobles. Blood stained the sacred ground. The city erupted. Stones and spears rained upon the Spaniards. The palace where Cortés held Moctezuma became a cage. The people of Tenochtitlan surrounded it, furious. Cortés forced Moctezuma to speak from the roof, begging for peace. But the people no longer listened. Their emperor was a prisoner. Their god was insulted. They hurled stones. One struck Moctezuma. Days later, he was dead. The bond between ruler and people was broken. War was the only path. And so came the Night of Sorrows, Noche Triste, June in 1520. Cortés and his men tried to flee the city under cover of darkness, but the Mexica attacked. On the causeways, warriors swarmed. Canoes filled the lake. The Spaniards stumbled under the weight of stolen gold. Arrows rained, spears pierced. Many drowned in the canals, dragged beneath the water by the weight of treasure. Cortés himself barely escaped, weeping under a tree as dawn rose. The Aztecs had won a victory. For a moment, the eagle spread its wings again, but fate had already turned. In their flight, the Spaniards left something behind, a weapon more deadly than sword or cannon. Smallpox, invisible, relentless. It spread through the valley like fire through dry reeds. Children coughed and died. Warriors collapsed in the streets. Even generals and priests fell to the plague. The empire bled without battle. When Cortés returned in 1521, he was not alone. Tens of thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors marched with him. The lakes filled with brigantines, small ships the Spaniards had built to command the waters. The siege of Tenochtitlan began. For months, the city resisted. Aztec warriors fought from rooftops, from canals, from causeways. They hurled stones, javelins, obsidian blades. They set ambushes in narrow streets. They endured hunger, thirst, and plague. But the net tightened. The brigantines cut off food from the chinampas. The causeways fell one by one. The aqueducts were destroyed. Famine stalked the city. People ate grass, bark, even dirt to survive. Still, they fought. Each day, drums boomed from the Templo Mayor, rallying the last defenders. Each night, fires burned on rooftops, signaling defiance. The Mexica would not surrender easily, but courage could not stop hunger. Faith could not cure disease, and obsidian could not break steel. By August 1521, the city was broken. Cortés' forces stormed the ruins. The canals ran red. Temples crumbled. Palaces burned. The last emperor, Cuitlahuac's successor Cuitlahuac, having died of smallpox, now Cuauhtémoc, fought until the end. Captured, he faced Cortés and said, "I have done all that I could to defend my people. Kill me now." But Cortés spared him for a time. Tenochtitlan, the city of the lake, the heart of an empire, was no more. What had risen from reeds and mud as a sign of the gods now lay in ashes. The eagle warrior had fallen. The sun still rose, but for the Mexica, it rose over ruins. The city of Tenochtitlan was gone. Its temples toppled, its palaces burned, its canals filled with rubble. Where once had stood the jewel of the Americas, now there were only ruins and smoke. The Spaniards built their new capital on top of the ashes. Stones from the Templo Mayor were used to raise churches. The palaces of Moctezuma became homes for conquistadors. The lake itself was drained, reshaped, subdued. What had been the Venice of the New World was now a scarred landscape under foreign rule. And yet, the Aztecs did not vanish. A civilization cannot be erased so easily. The Nahuatl language survived. On the lips of peasants, merchants, and storytellers, it lived. Even today, words like chocolate, tomato, cacao, and coyote come from their tongue. Every time these words are spoken, echoes of the Mexica whisper into the modern world. Their foods endured as well. Maize, chili, beans, squash, and cacao became the backbone of Mexico and gifts to the globe. The bitter drink of cacao, once reserved for nobles and warriors, transformed into the sweet chocolate that would conquer Europe. The humble maize became tortillas, tamales, and the daily bread of millions. Their artistry remained. Feather mosaics, codices painted with glyphs, sculptures of serpents and eagles, all survived, hidden, preserved, or remembered. Though the Spaniards destroyed countless treasures, enough endured to remind the world of the brilliance that once was. And their symbols endured most of all. The prophecy of the eagle on the cactus did not die with the fall of the empire. Centuries later, when Mexico fought for independence, the image returned. Today, on the flag of Mexico, you can still see it, an eagle, perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. The The same vision that once guided the Mexica to their city continues to fly above a modern nation. The Aztec legacy is not only in stone or symbol, but in spirit, in endurance, in survival. Despite conquest, despite plague, despite destruction, their blood flows in millions of descendants. Farmers in the valleys, workers in the cities, children playing in the streets of Mexico, all carry the heritage of the Mexica. And across the world, the name Aztec stirs fascination. Historians study their empire, artists recreate their temples, gamers lead their armies in battles of imagination. The Aztec eagle warrior still marches, not in the swamps of Texcoco, but in the minds of those who remember. Their story is a reminder that glory can rise from nothing, that faith can build an empire, that arrogance can bring collapse, and that even in ruin, a people may endure. The sun that once demanded blood now shines upon a nation that carries the memory forward. The Mexica no longer feed the gods with hearts, but they still live, in words, in food, in symbols, in spirit. The empire of sacrifice is gone. The empire of memory remains. This is the legacy of the sun, born in prophecy, raised in blood, destroyed by conquest, and reborn in the heart of Mexico. The empire is gone. The temples are dust. The causeways are broken. The lake has been drained. But if you listen closely, in the silence of Mexico's valleys, you can still hear something. The echo of drums, the cry of conch shells, the whisper of prayers rising with incense into the dawn. The memory of the eagle warrior. For though the Spaniards built a new world upon the ruins of the old, the spirit of the Mexica endures. It lingers in language, in food, in music. It survives in the symbols of Mexico itself. It breathes in the resilience of a people who refuse to vanish. The story of the Aztecs is more than conquest and blood. It is a story of faith, a story of human ambition, of how belief can move nations, how courage can shape empires, how destiny can blind as much as it inspires. Yes, the Aztecs believed the sun demanded blood. Yes, they built an empire that consumed itself in endless war. But they also built one of the greatest cities the world had ever seen. They turned a swamp into a metropolis. They turned wandering despair into imperial triumph. They turned myth into reality. Their tragedy lies not only in their fall to foreign steel and disease, but in their own system that could not stop hungering. An empire trapped by its own gods. An empire undone by its own brilliance. And yet, their triumph is clear. Because 5 centuries later, we still speak their names. We still marvel at Tenochtitlán. We still taste the maize, the chili, the chocolate they gave to the world. We still see the eagle on the cactus, devouring the serpent, flying on the flag of Mexico. The eagle warrior still marches, not across the causeways of Lake Texcoco, but across the imagination of history. In books, in songs, in classrooms, and even in games, where players send forth Aztec armies, eagle warriors swift and fierce, carrying the memory of a people who once believed they fought for the very survival of the sun. History is never silent. It whispers through time. The Mexica remind us that greatness and fragility walk hand in hand, that no empire, no matter how glorious, is eternal, but also that no empire, no matter how destroyed, is ever truly gone. The Aztec Empire ended in fire, famine, and steel, but its echoes remain in every word of Nahuatl, in every tortilla, in every note of Mexican song, in every beating heart that remembers. The sun still rises, the eagle still flies, and the legacy of the Mexica endures.